thank you very much for choosing to come to this panel on femicide. Femicide is most commonly defined as the misogynistic killing of women. Sometimes it's called the misogynistic killing of women by men. But I think we'll be hearing today how misogynistic killing isn't only committed by men. We've got a great panel this afternoon and our focus is international perspectives on femicide. I'm going to introduce our speakers one by one. Our first, sorry, I should say who I am too. My name's Karen Ingalla Smith. I work for a charity called NIA. We support women, and when I say women, those creatures with cervixes, women who've been subjected to men's violence, so sexual and domestic violence and abuse, and prostitution. I also run a project called Counting Dead Women, which tracks women who've been killed by men in the UK, and I'm co-director of something called the Femicide Census. And I'm going to be talking about them a little bit at the rally after this, so I'm not going to talk very much. Well, I'm not going to talk about those projects anymore other than that brief introduction, because we're going to focus on the panel today. Our first speaker is Patricia Chinyoka. She's an equality, diversity and inclusion consultant by day, but also she's a human rights activist, and she founded Care for Someone in Zimbabwe, which includes a project focusing on women, providing mentoring and support to women of Zimbabwe. Patricia, over to you. Thank you. Your slides are there.
Thank you. Sorry, that's going a bit so fast. Without them. So firstly, I'd like to say thank you to the Philia conference, the organizers, and to Lisa Marie for giving me this opportunity to come here and to speak. And very delighted, particularly as we are recovering and building back from COVID-19, so it's a huge opportunity. Just a little bit about me. So I actually live in the UK, and it is an honor to stand in front of you to speak, because women in Zimbabwe don't get the same opportunities that I have today to speak freely. When you speak freely, there are consequences to that. Women of Zimbabwe project was born out of COVID-19. It was launched on the 19th of April last year, after I'd had a lot of inquiries from women regarding support. And it falls under the umbrella of Care for Someone charity, which manages 3 different projects. And the first project is around supporting children continue their education. So that's the main focus. And the second element is a program that supports young people gain skills such as motor mechanics. And we are delighted that we're seeing young women in Zimbabwe coming forward to be trained. And the last project is the Women of Zimbabwe, which is a gender empowerment and advocacy for women's rights in Zimbabwe. So we speak largely from the UK, calling on the government of Zimbabwe to do the right thing and to adhere to the laws and to the constitution to protect women. Zimbabwe is a country in Southern Africa with more than 6.6 million people living in extreme poverty. Despite its struggles with issues such as economic trouble and food insecurity, the government has tried to improve on women's rights. Unfortunately, it hasn't worked. So there are official laws. The national government has made some progressive changes to its constitution and policies, but it is very much woven into the government of today, and where the challenges come in. Whilst the Constitution promotes gender equality by stating that men and women are equal, as well as outlawing sex or gender-based discrimination and behavior. Many of these laws remain disregarded in practice due to the format of Zimbabwe's government. Most of the laws passed are statutory, so that sounds really great, but they are also customary laws, and so this is where the challenges come into play. And these are laws that are acted upon by the chiefs and headmen, and they tend to do their own thing that violates the statutory laws, but very little is done about that. In terms of looking at the statistics in Zimbabwe of women that are killed intentionally because of gender being the main determinant, it's not just misogynistic in Zimbabwe or within relationships, but it is much broader and might be different to a lot of countries that have high rates of femicide. Most of the killings in Zimbabwe are by intimate partners, and I think some of the speakers that are going to come after me are probably going to allude to the same challenge. Sometimes it is strangers, sometimes it is own relatives, so there are instances of children killing their own mothers or sons killing their own mothers. So those cases are on the rise, and this is where the conflict comes into play between the statutory law and the customary law for all of those murders, the majority that are perpetrated under by children or by sons. They tend to be dealt with under customary laws, and people get away with murder, so to speak. There's also an angle of age-targeted killings. So when I was looking at a bit of research, I could see that this is across the world. It's an issue that impacts the world. Domestic violence, as you know, accounts for the majority of femicide cases. And during COVID-19, there's been a high rise of domestic violence and a high rise of killings in Zimbabwe. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to get the data because the country is so broken and there's very little that is happening to ensure that that data is being collected and making sure that government, the judiciary, so the courts, and also the police can act on the arrests and make sure that perpetrators are dealt with. And I wanted to share this story of the young lady that you see, or young girl that you see in the picture. Her name is Anna. She was 14 years old at the time of her death, and she was married to a 36-year-old man. And so the issue of child marriage also comes into play when we talk about femicide in Zimbabwe. And the age element that I talked about. And then the other angle of the challenges that I must highlight is the religious aspect. So there are some religions that are allowed to marry off young girls as young as 8. So girls are kept on the side, waiting to get to the age of 12 or 13, and they are passed off to a man under these religious customs. And Anna, unfortunately, was one of those young girls that it happened to. And she died whilst giving birth. And so she was killed at an altar, and this was 6 months ago. As I speak, we don't yet know what action government is going to take. We don't know whether the perpetrator who was supposedly arrested is going to face justice. So we are waiting, we've been asking questions, we have written to the different various government offices, and we're still to get some response about justice for Anna. Anna is not the only story. There are many Annas in Zimbabwe. Very young age, although child marriage has now been outlawed in Zimbabwe, so this was outlawed 3 years ago, it is still happening, and their stories go untold, and their families suffer with nowhere to go to get help. I also wanted to share some statistics, and I think I'm going to stand to the side here as I talk through some of those statistics of how women are killed in Zimbabwe. So there's a lot of accusations that arise, particularly within intimate partner killings, accusations of infidelity. So this is men that accuse their partners, their girlfriends, their wives of infidelity, and they die. And that is a high proportion of the deaths that are experienced in the country. There was also very recently someone that was deported from the UK, and this individual had killed their wife. They'd murdered their own wife here in the UK. As you can see, all those statistics apply to here in the UK. So Zimbabwean women that live here in the UK suffer and get killed by their husbands also. But one of the things that has been, I can say, positive to an extent, is that those individuals are deported once they've served their sentences. And when they arrive in Zimbabwe, there's no support to help those men and to rehabilitate them. So then they go on to reoffend, and everything just gets thrown under the carpet. This is also another classic story of the state and manhandling and the gross human rights abuses that happen in the country. So for those that don't know Zimbabwe, we've been under a rulership of ZANU-PF since 1980. And since 1980, they have been committing atrocities. The Gukrahundi, where 20,000 people died. In 2008, elections runoff, hundreds of people were killed. In 2018, 6 people were shot dead in broad daylight, and one of those was a woman. In 2019, between the 12th and 24th of January, during fuel protests, they targeted women. 50 women were raped, and a couple of women were killed. But those statistics are never reported upon. And the classic story of the 3 women that you see, these are 3 young politicians of the opposition party, MDC Alliance. They were arrested last year in May, having done a flash protest. They were taken to a police station. Whilst at the police station, they were abducted from the police station by state agents. They were taken to a hideaway. They were sexually assaulted, and they were made to drink each other's urine. They were held for 3 days, and then they were released after 3 days. They were taken to hospital. Whilst in hospital, the state agents, the police, came and rearrested them, and they were imprisoned. And so they are in and out, and their case is ongoing. So there's also the politicization of female issues in Zimbabwe, where the state steps in, muzzles women from speaking, and some of those women are killed. And we don't even have the names of those women. And what happens is what we find are bodies of people, or maybe skeletons, and there is no one that is accountable, and nobody is ever arrested for the majority of these atrocities. So what is going on? Is there anything that is being done to support or to prevent some of these killings that are happening in the country? So whilst Zimbabwe has signed up to the Sustainable Goals gender equality targets, which seeks to eliminate all forms of violence against all women and girls in the public and private spheres, including trafficking and sexual and other types of exploitation. It was just a tick box exercise because this is not being practiced in Zimbabwe. As I mentioned at the start of my speech, is that we have our constitution, which speaks to the protection of women and girls. We have women's charities that work inside Zimbabwe, and I can tell you now that they don't speak up. When Anna was killed, nobody spoke up. They were afraid to speak up because they would get arrested. And so Women of Zimbabwe calls upon the government of Zimbabwe to do the right thing, to ensure that they are acting upon all the legal provisions and improving on the legal provisions to protect the women and to ensure that perpetrators of violence are arrested and that they are dealt with. As I speak, there are thousands of cases within the judiciary system that have not been dealt with. So we continue with this work, but we want more voices, we want more women, we want more charities to come on board to support us so that we amplify the voices of those women that are suffering in Zimbabwe. Thank you.
It's difficult really for each one of our speakers that we hear this afternoon. The only response after they've spoken is, that's absolutely horrible, this is disgusting that it's happening to women. And I think I'm going to be saying it after each speaker. It's almost not about us as speakers, it's about what we're hearing about what is being done to our sisters. And I guess there are no words, but we have to find the words and we have to speak of what's being done to women. So we're next going to be hearing from Lubava Malisheva. Lubava's the founder of the Women's Museum in Moscow. She's a poet, a writer and an activist, and she's created the Russian Femicide census, which was launched in 2019. Welcome.
Hello, my name is Lyubova Malisheva. I am very glad to participate in this conference and to present a report about femicide in Russia. Our project is femicide.net. Between 20 and 30 volunteers each year work on the project. Here are some photos from Russia. They show our banners, posters and early reports. Our definition of femicide is the killing of women by men on the basis of hatred of women or because of negligence from the patriarchal interest of the state. What is the definition of femicide used by Russian authorities and journalists? There is none. In Russia, the word femicide is not popular with both feminists and the authorities. They prefer use domestic violence, domestic murder, murder of passion, and other. What are our sources? They use Google Alerts, regional sites of a Russian investigative committee. Many murders are not included in our statistics. The femicide rate per 100,000 women allows you to compare the situation in different countries. For example, in Spain, the femicide rate is 0.5. In Germany, it is 1.1. According to data for 2019, in the Far East Federal District of Russia, the femicide rate reached 4. And in some other regions of the country, it reached 7. In 2020, the femicide rate was 12 in one of the Russian regions. What we can learn from the statistics? First, let's look at the age of the victims and murderers. Women get killed starting from the birth. It shows that men are dangerous at any age. Let's look now at the relationship between the victim and the killer. The greatest danger for women comes from intimate partners, both present or familiar men. It is not a customary to talk about this, but sons and grandchildren are also danger for women. What do we know about the victims of Russian femicide? We don't know anything about most of the killed women. When we know details, the victims are most often pensioners, saleswomen, schoolgirls, businesswomen, unemployed, involved in prostitution, homeless women, students, and medical workers. What about killers? When we know they are unemployed, pensioners, drivers, policemen, homeless men, students, servicemen, and school children. We know the method of murder for almost all the cases. Beatings and murders with a knife are typical for Russia. They are followed by strangulation. Murder with occurrences, arson, dismemberment, and the use of firearms are the most socially dangerous and get presented by the news as big sensation, will shape the culture of femicide in Russia. If a Russian woman is killed, it likely happens in her home or in home of her intimate partner. Women are killed less often on the street. It's often believed that anyone who kills women is crazy. However, with a silly generalization and justification for femicide, mental illness is not the cause of femicide, but it can release the patriarchal attitudes of society. Here you can see how many cases are related to alcoholism, jealousy, systematic sadism, and drug addiction. The category other includes gaming addiction, schizophrenia, and other mental deviation. A typical stereotype in Russia is that women are killed by strangers and drug addicts in the forest. In reality, it is men familiar to them that kill them at home, and they are not drug addicts but alcoholic. According to report Crime and Punishment, What to Do with Russian Prisons, 93% of released prisoners are sent to prison again. We have found cases when a killer was in prison 10 or more times. The law in Russia can be interpreted very broadly, and some murderers receive fines and suspended sentences, and some receive life sentences. It depends more on the corruption and passivity of society than anything else. The Russian prison is now a femicide factory. By placing a rapist or a killer there, he learns even more cruel ideas. When he is released from the prison without any socialization and without any kind of support or supervision, we need a reform at justice. Here are prison terms for murders in 2019 in month. Only dead killers or killers who will spend life in prison, 89 people in total, are no longer dangerous for women. The rest will probably kill again after they get out of prison. In 2020, we started researching unfinished femicide. We define it as any attack on women. We supposed that the picture would be different. Of course, the picture was different. Is opposite to cases of finished femicide, attacks by strangers dominate the statistics. There are more cases of unfinished femicide, but it is reported less. The victims have another social status. Typically, men attack with the intent to rape. There are many cases to unfinished resource femicide, for example, robbery. Often, there are more than one victim. All cases when a woman successfully defends herself are unfinished femicide. Among Russian women convicted of excessive self-defense, 91% defended themselves from intimate partners and relatives. Now, let's look at media and femicide. Russian news contained most negatively frames with very few positive frames. In this way, the news form a femicide culture. There are many studies from different countries that show this. At last, I will tell you something that typically is not associated with such research. I wrote to many journalists in Russia, but nobody, including my editor, believed that the media influenced femicide. It worried me so much that once, during the night, I wrote libretto to an opera. Now, it is our large all-women project, Opera the Journalist. It's recently received a special diploma challenge of time at a major international competition for composers in Moscow. This is an opera about the influence of the media on femicide. And we have high hopes that his opera will be able to change the situation in Russia and the world. The opera can be staged in any country and is a direct musical action against femicide. Thank you for your attention.
is Vaishnavi Sundar. Just let me get my notes. Vaishnavi is an independent filmmaker. She's a writer and women's rights activist from South India. She's written, directed and produced all her films under a production company, Lime Soda Films. She writes extensively on social issues concerning Indian women on various media platforms, and all her films centre women too. She's concerned about the global invisibility of female filmmakers and has created a platform called Women Making Films that's now members from 19 countries. Her recent films have included Dysphoric and Displaced. Vaishnavi's talk this afternoon will cover some important themes in femicide, including selective sex abortion, so-called honour killings, dowry deaths, caste-based violence, which are all manifestations of women hating in India. A very warm welcome, thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, sisters. Thank you, Philia, for having me. It is the generosity of donors like you that made it possible for me to stand in front of you in person, in flesh, which almost seemed impossible just a week ago. This is not going to be an easy talk. Preparing for this talk has been very difficult because even though you've been working on various aspects of femicide over the years, to bring them all together in one talk, traveling almost 11 hours to deliver a 20-minute speech, made me choke every single time I picked up my laptop. But I'm going to do my best. As difficult as it may seem, I have to speak about it. As difficult as it may be for you to hear, we have to do this. Sex-selective abortion in law is a crime, yet India is famous for its trash bin babies. Girl children are just discarded into dustbins because families don't want them. Husbands think that it is somehow the wife's fault because she gave birth to a female child and not a male one who could carry on the heritage and the tradition of the family and also perform the last rites when the husband eventually dies, the father eventually dies. Trash bin babies are so popular that you probably have heard about it in international media as well. But what you probably don't know is there was a village in Uttar Pradesh, actually a bunch of villages, nearly 132 villages, where in 2019 there was not a single girl child born on paper. But we know what would have happened. If a child is not killed during pregnancy, there are cases where families have choked the baby to death, they have abandoned them. Orphanages are flooded with babies that are just lying there with no parent or any woman in sight. In many cases, these girls are born to unmarried women as a result of rape, or married women who are terrified that if she goes back home with a girl child, she's going to be abused by her entire family. At least 500,000 girl children are killed every year because of their sex. This has given birth to this notion of missing women. 100 million women are now missing in Asia, of which 40 million are missing from India alone. The government, in its effort to curtail this situation, came up with schemes like Beti Padhao, Beti Bachao, a sentence in Hindi which loosely translates to save a child, save a girl child and educate a girl child. It was such a fantastic program, and almost everybody in India knew about it because 56% of the cost of the money that was set aside for the campaign was spent on marketing. Everybody knew about it. apparently less than 20% was disbursed for the actual cost of the project. India is divided in many different ways. We are a massive country. If you think you don't know about India, I live in India, I don't know about India. We are divided in the name of caste, in the name of religion, in the name of language, in the name of region, skin color, educational qualification, you name it, we are divided. We are so divided. There are parts in the northeast corner of India where they speak a language which seems nothing like Indian language. And contrary to popular opinion that everybody in India speaks Hindi, is wrong. Yet most of the central governments or the union government's projects are in language that practically 80% of the country cannot understand, if they are effective at all. The National Crime Records Bureau, the NCRB, which gathers data about different crimes in the country, shows that the rate of crimes against Dalit women belong to a particular social strata, and they are at the bottom of it. It's a social strata on the basis of caste, where purely by the chance of birth, you're put inside these buckets of your caste, which is basically the caste your parents were born in. You're born with it, you die with it, and you're oppressed your entire life with it. The NCRB data shows that the rate of crimes against Dalits have risen in the last few years. The conviction rate has gone significantly lower. Dalit women are seen as impure and deprived because, I hate to say this, but the Dalit women are also considered untouchable, according to the social strata that I talked about. And yet, when they seek access to basic amenities, their bodies are used as objects to take revenge on because the Dalit communities are asking for access to basic rights. Police close such cases as fake cases because they don't want to get in the middle of caste violence, because it is usually stirs up a very difficult situation because police most of the time are complicit that Dalit women must in fact be raped because they are untouchable after all. Men also kill the women after they rape her because the criminal justice system in India is built in such a way that you can get away as a murderer far more easily than you can as a rapist, both of which are actually, men get away with it easily anyway, but men kill the women they rape because that's easier for them. 3 years ago, an average of 10 rapes per day were reported of Dalit women. Fast forward to now, it is one woman every 20 minutes. In all cases of attacks on women, the accused, the state, and private actors escape punishment. In most cases, the attacks were neither investigated nor prosecuted. The plight of Dalit and other oppressed caste women has also been neglected by various political movements. Cases of rape and deaths in police custody, the body, well, you shouldn't be doing anything to a person who you claim to have done wrong and you have kept in custody, and yet police often rapes women in custody. And because it will become a law and order problem, they take the woman, they discard her somewhere to absolve themselves of this crime. But it does happen. There is a particular caste in the Dalit community where the women do not have a choice but to do sex work after they are married and they have their first child. And that is the only way they can bring food for their children. These women live in the outskirts of the state where you have these highways and truck drivers have access to. So these women often end up being raped by these men. And in many occasions, these women do not come back home because the men get violent and they kill her. These are not recorded in the National Crime Report Bureau. Regardless of the caste of woman, men gang rape women and upload them on pornography websites, to a point that if there is a gang rape and the news or the media agency announce the name of the woman, the first search item in porn website is the girl's name. Just take a minute to process that. They search the name of the girl that was raped on a porn website, hoping to watch it. And these videos remain on those websites for as long as. Sorry, you're going to have this happen over and over again. There is also something called honor that Indians are very fired up about. There is honor about caste, there is honor about religion, there is honor about one's language. There's just honor in everything. And somehow that honor is either in a woman's clothes or inside her vagina. A man walked through the streets of Uttar Pradesh carrying his 17-year-old daughter's head to the police station, accepted that he did it, and he was arrested. His justification was that he found her with a man in an alleged compromised situation. Therefore, he had to, for the family's honor, behead her and set an example out of her so that anybody in the family or in the community wouldn't dare do it. There is also cases where women are killed, and men too, if they dare to fall in love with a woman of the upper caste. Now, one would think that honor is always associated with sexual relations, marriage, and things like that. But then, it's not so, apparently, because a 17-year-old girl in some rural area just liked to wear a pair of jeans as opposed to her traditional clothes, which were just not her thing. Beaten to death for an entire day. Not strangled, not killed, not given poison, none of that. Was beaten for an entire day until she was dead because she dared to wear jeans, and women in the family do not dare do that. There is also cases of medical negligence in which women end up being killed in the hands of hospitals, in the hands of doctors who do not care about our body and how biologically our bodies are different. There are many cases in which during abortions, women have died due to blood loss. There is also cases where there are mass sterilization drives because the country is suddenly afraid that there is population explosion happening. Men have continued to walk away with their penis intact, but women with no anesthesia are put through very, very painful, invasive sterilization procedures. There's a fantastic documentary called Something Like a War by this Indian filmmaker called Deepa Dhanraj that poignantly talks about the plight of these women. Most of these women are in rural areas and they're promised like a meager 500 rupees if they go through the procedure, and these women want to do it because they will bring that 500 rupees home. You're probably all familiar with the cases of dowry deaths. I suppose the diaspora families living abroad also end up doing it sometimes. A dowry is money that you give away along with the girl when you marry her off, because the man is apparently doing you a favor by marrying the girl. And therefore, she can't just go like that. You have to send her off with gold, with diamonds, and money, and vehicle, and car, and everything. Many cases where the family had promised a certain amount of money, which in fact is illegal actually, the family then harasses the girl who was married, to get more money, or to get a better car, or that somehow she's not good enough wife, therefore the family must demand more dowry after all, because now that they have lived with her, they realize that maybe she's a defective piece. So then they harass her, and she goes begging to the family. And if the family can't afford to give it, they can't afford to give it. So the woman comes back to the husband because the family doesn't want her, because she's married off now, it's no longer their business. Many times the girls are manipulated emotionally in such a way that they kill themselves because they can't go to their family, they can't continue living here, so they end up killing themselves. 20 women die every day, apparently, due to dowry deaths. This was a statistic that blew my mind when I was researching for this talk. This is still only the reported cases, by the way. These are not cases where in rural areas these things happen often, but they don't go on record. The National Crime Report Bureau doesn't care about women living in the far extremes of the country. While this is going on, there is a very, very active men's rights activism movement that has flourished because they think women use this legal act that we have in the Constitution to somehow persecute men on false dowry cases. The MRA movement is funded by the who's who of the Indian men. There are big industrialists who are part of this movement who believe that women just cry victim all the time, therefore they must not be taken seriously. 20 women a day. Of course, there is prostitution. India has the largest number of trafficked women coming into the country, wanting to find a better life. Some of them just want to find a job. They are promised that, but when they come here, they realize this was the job all along. Many women who come into the mainland as sex workers do not have an identity card or something, something that could say that this person has now in fact been murdered. We don't have record of these women. They just walk into the country hoping they can find some money they can send back home. So if these women are killed, there is no way for us to find out. And in India, there is a law that says that if a child is born to a prostitute, the child is not allowed legally to live out of the earnings of the prostitute. Therefore, these girls, and if they are girls, end up coming back into prostitution themselves at a very, very young age. And this circle kind of keeps going on and on. Coming to things that are happening at the moment, and this is a sort of a global phenomenon. Lesbian women don't have any place in Indian society because our country also is actively promoting the transgender ideology. Men are opting to self-identify as women. Men are contesting in women-only village panchayat elections and winning as female. Now, these positions are set aside on affirmative action basis, right? These are for women who can stand as political leader of that village to represent the problems of those women. A man contests in it and wins it. And you know what his prerogatives are, you know what his, the manifesto is? To lay roads in the village. Important, thing to take care of. But the reason why there is a woman category set up there is to, tackle situations like, domestic violence, prostitution, pornography, could be anything. But no, a man has contested in it, won it, and is apparently laying roads. There have been cases where women who have openly expressed their love for a fellow female and have been hung in public display to make an example out of, obviously, because how did she dare step away from the heteronormative society that India is, not to mention extremely homophobic. These girls did nothing wrong. They just probably didn't even announce it in a way, but the family got suspicious because these two girls were spending so much time with each other. This is when they murder them. And there are cases in which the girls kill themselves because the families force them to marry a man and in fact tell the man to rape her because she might resist. If a child is born, everything will be all right. So these women end up killing each other because not only do they have to live their life away from the woman they love, now they have to put up with this man who will rape her every night. By the way, in India, marital rape is not illegal. Transgenderism is taking its shape in a way that I'm afraid. Young lesbians are spending a large amount of money in getting double mastectomy and hysterectomy in India. And I understand, based on my film Dysphoric that I finished, and my great opportunity to speak with a lot of women and therapists and psychoanalysts abroad, I'm coming to understand that there are many cases of ROGD in India as well. All of them either gay or lesbian, just wanting to fit into the category of the heteronormative India that is. Johns Hopkins, a very, very famous American university and hospital chain, has set up a trans clinic for people to come and get surgeries. Their claim is that they're doing this to prevent men from getting AIDS, because there are many trans sex workers as well. That is how they entered the country, but right now, all they're advertising, double mastectomy and hysterectomy. Social media is filled with young girls wanting to be men. With all these things said about the situation of women in India, I'm not one bit surprised that they want to flee womanhood. I wanted to for a long, long time. I suppose there are things that we don't even think of that happens to Indian women. For example, there's a farmers' protest going on right now. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it. There are laws that are very, very dangerous for farmers, so they're protesting it, and the government, 1 year later, still hasn't come to a solution, but a politician's son ran over a farmer in broad daylight and killed him. The farmers' wives, who are also farmers, do not have right to inherit the land. Many farmers, males, kill themselves. The woman is left behind. She has the land, not legally. She has the land, the one that she has been farming on for so long, but she can't do anything with it because legally she can't own it. She kills herself too. Old women are no different in our country as well. They are either abandoned, they are discarded, nobody wants to take care of them. They are as vulnerable as young children to be raped by very young men as well. There are cases of over 60, women over 60 being dragged and raped and discarded. I realize I've summed up the entire, in terms of age, I have sort of covered the whole thing, but I realize men don't have to kill us to kill us. And I realize it's unfortunate that these women are murdered, but I realize just by being alive, we're fighting it. We're fighting it by being alive. We're fighting it by taking space. We're fighting it by speaking in conferences like this. I'm very, very afraid, and well, I'm grateful that the second wave feminists have spent their whole life fighting for this and have, brought the movement further so that my generation could enjoy all these rights. But I am afraid that maybe I will also spend my entire lifetime doing this. Thank you.
Thank you, sisters. We now have some time for questions from the audience or any, well, yeah, let's try to stick to questions. If you've questions that you'd like to ask of our three speakers, then please raise your hand. For the roving mic, I can see a woman down there.
Thank you. Patricia, you were mentioning at the beginning of your talk the rehabilitation of men. I'm wondering, considering everything that we heard today, to what extent do you think it is possible to rehabilitate the male sex and the horrific things that they do? And if you do believe that, in what way can we think of that? Thank you.
In what way can we help with regards to the statistics you had initially talked about? She's asking what are the practical ways in which people can help.
I think it's helping the women's charities. Yes, it's helping the women's charities that work on the ground in Zimbabwe by enabling them to collate the statistics, because these are women that work within communities, and sometimes what they lack is the phones, for example, to go and interview. So it's financial support to get surveys done and conducted, and traveling to the different areas around the country to hear the women's stories. And so sometimes it could be a story in a rural area and people are not able to travel there. So it's enabling the charities to be able to do that and to gather the statistics, because some of the stats that I shared today, it came from Musasa project, which works in Zimbabwe and is funded by individuals to enable them to do that, because the government is very reluctant to share data. So the last time that there was data on femicide specifically in Zimbabwe was in 1990. And so all of this data is really hearing stories from people and also from community groups. Thank you.
Thank you. You're all in darkness to us. In the,
We have a question here, but I
okay.
first, and then we'll come back.
All right. Hi. It's Rebecca Mott, who writes a blog about prostitution. I want to ask a question that comes from me, but from other exited women that I know. The murders of prostituted women is usually not recorded or reported. And this is not an accident. This is because the sex trade is, for over 3,000 years, has been experts at disappearing bodies. I think that if we were going to record femicide, we need to say that prostituted women as a group, as a class, are the most likely women in the world to be murdered. And we really need to stop saying that it's just domestic violence. Well, not just, but, we need to make it very clear that prostituted women disappear on a scale that is I don't know any exited woman who hasn't known women who've disappeared. Not one woman, but say 3 or 4. I knew at least 3 that I can remember. I've got very bad fragmented memory of that time. But I think one of the things that a punter said to me when I was in prostitution said, I could murder you and nobody would care. That's a fact. That's not an overstatement. That's just a fact. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. I wonder whether any of our panellists want to make any points about femicides in their country, specifically relating to prostitution.
Yes, so if I go first, so as I mentioned during my short speech, it's the politicization of everything in Zimbabwe. The fact that there are prostitutes, and unfortunately, as is in this country, some quite young, from the age of 10, 11. So I was talking to a community leader a couple of days ago, and they were telling me about 9-year-olds to 13-year-olds that are prostitutes and that are working under an older woman. And so when they disappear, when they die, nobody knows about it, as is the older female prostitutes. Nobody knows about it. There is no data collation, and so it's just treated as a death by a sickness. So it's a huge, huge challenge. And one of the things that women of Zimbabwe want to do is work with these community leaders to try and collate the data, try and collate the stories so that we have that evidence, because without evidence, we can't bring about any change. Government will just throw it back into our faces. And so the politicization angle also means that they're projecting to the world that Zimbabwe has great legal provisions for women and that it protects women and girls. It doesn't at all. And so, we're talking about climate change here and the fact that there's going to be a huge climate conference for 12 days in November. And what women of Zimbabwe are calling to the British government, to the Zimbabwe government, is that what about the people climate? What about those women who die and just disappear? And so the huge challenges around collating the data and also the analysis or the classification of the deaths when these women die.
I would also like to point out that in India, it's not just the Indian women that are prostituted. We have women from Nepal, Bangladesh, and Pakistan who are often trafficked into the country, often with no documents. So because they don't have documents, they are threatened by their pimps to stay in the trade for as long as. And there are cases where young girls are trafficked into the country from Bangladesh and they are injected with cow steroids because they want those little girls to appear a bit older, which will be desirable for the men. Now the shocking thing is, while all this should seem very obviously abhorrent, organizations like Mama Cash is working with the Sex Workers Association in the country in putting down the already useless trafficking bill in the country, because they want to distinguish that they are not trafficked, they're doing it out of choice, therefore they don't want the traffic bill to be passed. It is true that these women are extremely vulnerable to violence and to murder, but it is also true that they are the one demographic which is very, very difficult to keep record of. So I agree that they are murdered, but at the same time, there is very little the state is able to do, especially in a country like mine when they are selling their soul to European organizations in support of sex work.
They're aware of femicide of women involved in prostitution. This is true for indoor and outdoor prostitution, both. Also, many women who are involved in sauna brothels or glamour porn, and also models. Also models. The authorities and the policymakers deny the relationship between prostitution and vulnerability. And the big problem is that the feminists many feminists ignore this problem as well. They ignore the murder of women in prostitution. She made some artwork. You can see it in the hall. This is, I haven't seen it yet, but this is like an iceberg of factors that contribute to a risk of being murdered, and prostitution is included among the risk factors. Femicide is a system, and prostitution is one of the factors. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a few things I'd like to say. Thank you, Rebecca, by the way, and hello. I think even when in the UK prostitution history is known of a woman who hasn't been disappeared, when her death's known about, one of the things I've experienced as NIO when we get involved in domestic homicide reviews of women who have been involved in prostitution is that sometimes that panel tries to write out that woman's involvement in prostitution from that review. And what we've found is that they're often, not always, but often chaired by retired police. And there's this idea that it'll be difficult for the family to hear that the woman was involved in prostitution, and it might be disrespectful. It might lead to lack of sympathy about her death. And I think there's that way of then people are buying into making prostitution the woman's shame rather than the filthy fucking punters that get their hands on the women. And so, and another thing that does, that means that it stops the panel, it stops those agencies, it stops police agencies looking at how prostitution creates barriers for women to get help. Because if we're not able to name and identify the problem, we can't look for solutions. So that's one of the things that we try to do at NIA, and we try to talk them out of using the minimising language, you know, like she was an escort, for example, when, you know, that really hides the reality of what's done to women. And I think the media as well often buys into that and won't cover that a woman has a history in prostitution when she's being killed. So it's quite difficult for us sometimes at the Femicide census to get an idea of the scale of murders of women whose bodies we do find and are able to identify as femicides. It's hard for us to get an idea of the scale of women who are killed who've been involved in prostitution in the UK. So, yeah, I absolutely agree with what you're saying, Rebecca, but I think the problem is that the women that we do find who aren't disappeared, that history is erased as well. And just to mention that those of you who were at Filia 2 years ago in Bradford will remember that we had a speaker on the panel called Manuela Schoen, and she's an activist in Germany and is one of a bunch of women, so she spoke on the Femicide panel specifically about femicides of women in prostitution. And there's a website, and I'm really sorry, I just tried to find it on Google now and I couldn't, but I'll maybe mention it to Lisa Marie and see if we can get that website put in a Femicide Filia newsletter, because they're trying to track globally the murders of women who are involved in prostitution, and they've got every year and the murders of every woman. So that's something that we can all contribute to. If we know a woman who has been killed, was involved in prostitution, whatever country we're in, if we can email that project so that they can help highlight this additional form of harm that's done to women through prostitution. Okay, next question, please. Was there somebody there, and then I think we've got somebody over here.
Yes, well, actually, my name is Halal Tahiri, and I'm originally from Iran, Kurdish from Iran. And the story from my colleague in panel about Indian just remind my country, Iran, Kurdistan, Iraq, that I lived there. And femicide and honor killing and disappearing of those women, whether they are politicians, whether they are women activists, whether they are prostitutes, it doesn't matter. They are just vanished in any direction. For example, in Iran, they are starting It's a systematic, it's the state femicide, which the government, the man of the government starting raping activist women because they wanted to shush them. They wanted that they don't do anything. They rape them, they film them, they show the film on YouTube, and then many of those women, whether they became suicide because of the shame, because of they were scared, go back to the community, to the family, they will be killed. And some of them have been killed by their family because of the backward attitude rather than being supported, even the family starting blaming them, and many of them running out of the country. So even the state using, for political reason, killing women in a political exchange between two nations, for example, because they are Kurdish women activists, and then they will be raped by the Iranian soldiers, and then it will be shame for the family, shame for the nation, shame for the person herself. At the same time, the government will fight in that direction with Kurdish people. Right now, we are doing campaign to fight against this femicide. It's not one or two or three, just women, young women, women activists, students, just disappear, and suddenly they will be found in the valley, in the water, and then it will be published on the media. And it's a very dangerous zone that even there, women will be used in the political opinion as well.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Question.
Hi, mine's going to be really quick. I'm Gemma. Point number 1, thank you. Point number 2, how can we help you?
How can other women help?
I don't know how I can help. I know. I find myself in pretty helpless situations myself while I'm in India dealing with cases like these, because it's a systematic problem, isn't it? You suffer in your home, in your society, in your street, in public transport, and then you go to the police and you get abused there, and then you complain about that, you go to the court, it gets dragged on, and you're abused there over and over, asking you to reiterate how you were raped, what was inserted inside you over and over by male members of the legal system of the country. I don't know, whenever I make my films as well, I'm not some person who's trying to give solutions. I'm trying to say that I don't have a solution. That's why I'm making the films. There are organizations that are doing work, you know, domestic violence rescue centers and things like that, acid victims, things like that. But I think money is not the only help. Personally, I would prefer a separatist country, but that's not going to work. But if it does, that's one solution for us. Otherwise, unfortunately, things are looking bleak.
Thank you. Would you like...
How can people help?
Sorry.
If everyone, if her own country, if you promote equality of women, if you fight femicide in your own country, you are making a good example for other countries. So this is a good benchmark for them. Your local activity is a benchmark for their activity in Russia. It is very important for her to show in Russia, because in Russia many people, policymakers and ordinary people make the argument that the men are naturally violent, they are violent everywhere. But if she can show that in other countries anti-violence programs work, that domestic violence is less, femicide decreases, femicide decreases, so she can prove that this is femicide or any murder. It is not a part of inner nature of men. So she wants you locals to work on local level in your own country and to make it benchmark for her country. And also she would love to work on shared projects, any initiatives, international initiatives, between Russia and other countries. So if someone is willing to cooperate with her, she will be happy to do it. The last year they have established an anti-femicide international group. Yeah, now they're working on a book. They're writing a book about the femicide situation in different countries. So they will be willing to take some next step after this book is finished. So when you know this project is finished, so just join and help it. And donations are also very important.
Patricia.
Thank you so much for that question. So as I mentioned, I think during my presentation and also in answering questions, is that Zimbabwe is a different country in that the women are muzzled. So today we're meant to be the three women whose image I shared, the three women who are abducted, sexually assaulted, and made to drink wine, so urine. So they were meant to come here and speak and share their own stories. But the help that we would really appreciate is amplifying the voice and the work of women of Zimbabwe. So we want as many people as possible to know about it. We are always looking for mentors to help mentor some of the women in Zimbabwe on the ground, to give them that confidence, to support them through that mentoring so that they can grow their own businesses and ways of earning money, because the disparity between men's earnings and women's earnings are what leads to some of these gross human rights abuses and violations that we see, because the women have no money and no means to earn their own money. And so they live in these relationships and these marriages, they're abused and they die at the hands of men, or they go into prostitution where they face further abuse. So we are on the website, we've got our website. If that's shared through Filia Conference, please feel free to connect. We also do take donations. So we are starting a sewing class in January for about 20 women, so who've come from prostitution and some who just live within the community because they've got nothing to do. The sewing machines are already there. They were donated by a charity here in the UK, and that will empower those women to earn money for themselves. And each woman will get the sewing. So the sewing that they used to learn, we will donate that to them as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Gemma, personally, I don't think you can do much more than you are doing, but for all of us, I just wanted to talk a little bit about political will and what we can do as women who, and I'm talking, I suppose, specifically in a UK context, what we can do. Joan Smith gave a talk this morning, and one of the things that she mentioned was virtue signalling legislation, and she gave the example of the current moves to make misogyny a hate crime, and she talked about that as an example of virtue signalling legislation, and I agree with Joan on that, and I don't support the moves to make misogyny a hate crime. One of the things we need to let our governments know, or prospective governments, politicians know, is that we expect to see long-ranging actions to tackle men's violence against women, and that to do that, we need to do that in a broader context of tackling the subjugation of women and the domination of men. And I think it's really important that we let our politicians know that we don't just want little things that they can show that they've done so that they can sell us this as a big achievement next time they want our votes. We want them to recognise that the changes that they're making now might not make a difference to femicide rates for 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, but that still makes a difference to us as voters. We want to make sure that the Labour Party know in particular that you can't do this if you refuse to identify women as a sex class. How on earth can we end men's violence against women? I just think to politicians, what counts is votes. So let them know that they can only count on your vote if they make sure that women count.
Sorry, do we have time for one more question?
Yes, a quick one, hopefully.
Hi, a quick one. Rebecca Johnson from Women in Black, and Vaishnavi, I probably pronounced it wrongly, but anyway, you spoke about the specific kind of forms of violence and torture and femicide of lesbians. So my question is really to Patricia and Russia, because we know we've got dear friends in Zimbabwe who are lesbian women who are working with women there, and we know of the oppression of lesbians in Russia. I'd like to hear a little bit more about both what is going on there and Vaishnavi, by all means, please say a bit more about the situation in India, and also again just really, and what can we here do to stop this persecution and femicide and erasure of lesbians?
Thank you, and I'm sorry, but I'm asking you, panel, to keep your answers quite short.
Okay, thank you. So if I can tackle the last question first, what can you do is, connect with us. There's so many projects that we are running. We want to amplify the voices of the women that are facing challenges in Zimbabwe so that we can prevent the killings. I think the big part is preventative measures so the killings are not happening in the first place. And also, the different types of killings that are happening there are sex killings, intimate partner violence, strangers, sons killing their mothers, and sometimes daughters. And this is to do with customary beliefs. And there's also the religious side of people being killed. There are women's groups in Zimbabwe, but they have very little voice, so they cannot have these platforms and speak. And so we try and amplify those voices. They do, but it's very tiny voices and very few organizations that can challenge government. It's very difficult to challenge the government of Zimbabwe.
Thank you. Lubava?
They don't have many statistics that refer to lesbian women murder. Only 2 lesbian women officially registered. And the murder wasn't related to their sexual orientation. According to the official legal statistics, more than 2,000 women, more than 5,000 women are murdered in Russia every year. And lesbian women are lost in this ocean of murders, which is either not registered or people just don't know and don't speak about it. But one region is, in one region, women are especially vulnerable, which is Caucasus area. In this area, this is, what country, is it Russia? Caucasus. This is the murder of honor, so-called murder of honor is ubiquitous there, and many lesbian women are murdered just on the ground of being suspected as lesbians. There was one case when lesbian women escaped, two lesbian women escaped that area, but they were returned back by the police. Police returned that woman to her family, and she was video recorded telling that she's safe and perfectly okay. And she was wearing traditional clothes and insisted that she is okay, but obviously we cannot know anything about her.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just a couple of things to close. Firstly, we're asking everybody to join us in the hall at 5 o'clock, which is just about now. So hang around, please, if you can, and join us on the vigil to commemorate women killed by men. I think we can collect candles as we leave, but we're starting out here together. So please stick around for that. We'll be setting off very soon. And I don't know if Zura's in the room who spoke this morning, but as we were coming to an end, I thought about something that she said about the importance of self-care when we're dealing with the horrible things that we face as feminists. And I want to acknowledge that everybody here in the room has heard some horrible things in the last hour and a half, but to go back to what Zura said about the importance of self-care, and just sort of put that in the context of, I hope everybody has a really good time tonight, and part of that is enjoying ourselves, coming together as women and doing some self-care, doing some celebrations. Great if you're one of the lucky ones that you've got a ticket to be at the Filia event, but if you're not, I know that there are other women getting together elsewhere. So please do some celebration and look after each other and practice some self-care.
Please, can we have a really large round of applause one more time for the whole panel, Karen, all of them. They're amazing. And everything they're doing. Thank you so much.